Thank you, guys. I don't know how I'm going to follow that act, but I'll try, and I'll try to keep it short as well. It's really a testament, actually, to the passion and dedication of all of you guys and the amazing job of curation that the BigchainDB and IPDB team has put together, that you guys are still here at the end of 2 days, still in a pretty full room. So without further ado, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about COALA. So COALA, it stands for Coalition of Automated Legal Applications, but COALA sounds much nicer. We try to make blockchains fuzzy and accessible. Oh. Okay, so a little bit about us. So we are a nonprofit registered in the United States and also a nonprofit registered in France. We started out as a global organization because our members were global, the technology is global, and the issues are also global. We are a very decentralized community. We have a core team that runs our, sets our mission, helps coordinate the working groups, and decides on what projects to move forward with. We have diverse stakeholders within our team. So we have working groups across a number of disciplines. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have members and partners from government and academia and other members of civil society. And then we also have a scientific committee that oversees our work. So just a little bit about what we've been up to. We've been around for about 3 years. We've had 10 conferences and workshops across 4 continents. And right now we have 100 plus working group members that are active. So Bruce was lovely enough to come and keynote our conference in Kenya last year, which was the first blockchain conference in Africa. And you know, he has written quite a bit, actually, on this sort of thing. And this quote, I think, is really important because this is why we formed COALA. So COALA formed 2014, 2015. We were a group of lawyers and academics and entrepreneurs, and what we realized were that the technologists, and this was still very much in the kind of crypto anarchy, early Bitcoin days, that the technologists were speaking a language and creating a new world that didn't quite interoperate with the legacy world. And the lawyers were quite aware of this of the real world implications and the legal infrastructure that all exists in the meat space, as some call it, that would come to the fore. So we realized that the technologists needed to understand what the lawyers were talking about. The lawyers needed to understand how the tech worked. And so this is why we formed COALA, because a lot of us were early internet researchers and lawyers, and we saw how we got it really wrong with the internet. I think Greg talked a little bit about this. So as beneficiaries of the lessons of the early internet, as some of the lawyers that worked on these early cases of issues of first impression, you know, what the role of ISPs are, what people can do online, what does this mean for our civil liberties. We understood when Bitcoin and blockchain came to the fore that these were going to be some of the most important issues. So a little bit about what we've been up to. We held our first workshop with technologists and lawyers at Harvard and MIT in January of 2015. And this is actually where we started mapping out some of the legal frameworks around DAOs, which was very early on. And we had so much fun, we decided 2 months later to do it again at Stanford. So Stanford, we were lucky enough to have John Perry Barlow come and talk a little bit about what his declaration of cyberspace might mean for the blockchain world. We are really lucky and fortunate to work with a lot of the early internet pioneers. And they really see blockchain as their second bite at the apple. And so hopefully we can learn a few lessons from there, and that's why we've been bringing them into the conversation. We continued this in June in London. We then, a few months later, we convened in Hong Kong, and we started bringing in more people from other parts of the world to join the conversation. Then we held our other conference at Sydney in December of 2015. And this is where Professor Lawrence Lessig, who is one of the great titans of internet law, actually said his first statement of how blockchain is really as fundamental as the pipes of the internet. So in March of last year, we also held a special session at the European Commission where we started discussing how these technologies might enable policymakers and regulators to perform their jobs and their administrative duties better. We also held a core meeting in March in Cambridge, where we had some of the leading cryptographers and protocol architects in the space meeting together to figure out what this protocol stack might look like. We then carried this conversation back to the United States, New York. And then last year, we did our conference in Kenya. It was extremely eye-opening. You know, as someone who's been in the blockchain space for a few years now, you know, and a lot of the early conversations around how this technology can help, you know, folks in developing countries. It was very, very exciting to be there, fast forward 4 or 5 years later, to see how these technologies could really take root. And we had a very, very great reception there. There's a lot of innovation to be had. And then we also held a governance workshop at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. Following that, we convened our working groups again in Paris, where we continued the work. And then in March, we had 2 separate events. One was with ISOC, we put on the first blockchain, Bitcoin and Ethereum tutorial in Africa. And then also in tandem with that, we organized the first Birds of Feather blockchain research group meeting at the IETF in Chicago. If any of you guys are interested in working with any of these standards bodies or being a part of the conversation, please let me know. These conversations are ongoing. And then finally, we also, in July, we just launched COALA Lex. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we are also holding our next conference now in October. So COALA is, we're a community, and we're also a network of academic research universities. So very early on, we saw that there were a lot of entrenched interests that could drive policy and development in the real world. So very early on, we made sure that one of our core constituencies and representations would be the role of academic universities. We think that universities are the neutral body of public knowledge, and that is something that's badly needed here, where you see a lot of noise and private interest driving the conversation. So here are a few of our academic partners. We also have our working groups, as I mentioned, across various subject matters. If any of you guys are interested in joining any of these working groups, they are open, they're ongoing. We meet a few times a year. And then our scientific committee also oversees our projects. So we have a broad cross-section of visionaries and leaders in their field, both from the United States and also outside, that help oversee some of our projects. So in essence, COALA is really a community of you guys and various experts and entrepreneurs that are working in the space. We work hard to make sure that anything that's bubbling up and percolating in the ecosystem gets fed and discussed at standard-setting bodies. So COALA represents the dynamic coalition for blockchain technologies at the UN's Internet Governance Forum. So every year there's an annual meeting, and the IGF is a multi-stakeholder forum where constituencies from various parts of the world meet together and decide collectively on policies over the internet. So this is a model that we think is necessary for global governance of these global technologies, and we're continuing to lead the conversation there. So the heart of our work. So people ask what we do. We do a lot of things. This is a very fast-moving space. We have a very diverse community that works on a number of these projects. So first are these community workshops, where our working groups meet, and then we also do the public education. We also produce research briefs and papers. Many of them are up on our website, and a lot of them are ongoing, because once we get to a final stage, usually the space has changed and we need to update before publishing. It's a fast-moving target. We actively interact with these standard-setting bodies and hold multi-stakeholder dialogue. We maintain our network of this academic body of research institutions. And then we also, because most of our members are both trained in our membership comprises both the legal and technical fronts, we have a unique opportunity to really see where the various projects and technologies really need to work together and coordinate to interoperate. So what we do is we try to articulate foundational building blocks and tools, at least from a conceptual level. And then finally, one of our core focuses, and this is because we started out really trying to bridge the gap between law and technology from our very inception, where our core focus is actually governance frameworks and the development of techno-legal tools. So blockchain workshops, we hold these a few times a year. It's really an excuse for our working groups to meet. So this is the format. Usually, if you guys come and join any of our events, this is what you'll experience. We usually hold an internal workshop. This is 2 days where we have a lot of fun. Our working groups meet. These are, I think, some of the best and brightest in the fields that come and riff together. We also hold, at the end of these workshops, a policy roundtable. So when we go to a specific country and hold an event there, a workshop, we invite the local regulators or the policymakers to interact with our working groups so that they can actually have a level set on where the technology is, and we can start socializing them on what the implications are. And then finally, we hold the public conference, which is really about getting the work of our community disseminated and translated to the public. So we have a lot of fun. And here are some of the projects that we're working on. These are still, very much work in progress. If you guys are working on things that have synergies or you guys have questions, please come find me. Please help out with these initiatives and help cross-pollinate these ideas. The COALA Lex initiative that we just launched this year is a consortium for legal frameworks and smart contracts, and trying to figure out where the rubber hits the road and how to make these things actionable in the real world today. COALA IP, you guys heard a little bit about from Trent, as it's integrated into the Ocean Protocol. COALA IP is a beautiful example of what happens when the community works together. COALA IP came out of the Hong Kong blockchain workshops, where we had 2 days. Trent, Juan Benet, other members of the COALA network, we just worked together over 2 days and created an open standard for property rights, IP rights. COALA ID is kind of an articulation of principles. COALA ID is a conceptual and technical framework for credential management and access controls. This is spearheaded by Vlad from Ethereum, who's done a lot of work and thinking on these things. The reason why we decided to work on COALA ID was because privacy, identity, these were all buzzwords in the space. A lot of us working in the trenches in the technology understood that the policy implications were not well understood, that it was incredibly important to get this architecture right, and that there were very few people who had the domain expertise to be able to build it. So we wanted to make sure that any identity standard that came out would be one that was properly articulated with these principles. So we thought this was important enough that we needed input from the entire community to make sure that the architecture of authentication, credential management, and access controls, and how we interact on the internet would be done correctly. And then Elethron is a conceptual framework. We have a UI, we have the smart contracts engine. It's a proof of concept on how a peer-to-peer decentralized energy market might work. We are partnering with a couple of folks, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, Hewlett-Packard. We're also actively onboarding other companies in the energy space who want to help develop this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in the interest of time, I'm going to run through these projects very quickly, since we've already talked a little bit about this. Onto COALA Lex. So, COALA Lex. COALA Lex was formed because you're hearing all of this activity on how to implement smart contracts, what smart contracts can be used for. What people don't really realize is that these technologies operate in a world that's already bound by law, and these laws constrain action. So the legal culture and the laws on the books, these are realms that are not separate from the technological realm, and we need to work on both to make sure that they interoperate. So with smart contracts, you have a lot of new challenges. There are different kinds of code, and they do things very differently. So one thing I want to leave you guys with is that smart contracts do something that we've never seen before in the law. They allow for something called ex ante governance mechanisms. What this means is this is kind of pre-crime. It's a kind of being able to stop something before it happens rather than addressing the harm after it happens. So our entire legal structure is posited on a framework of ex post governance mechanisms. So what we really need to do is figure out how we can utilize, so on one level, ex ante governance mechanisms are great, automation, enforcement of agreements. On the other hand, because these things happen in real time, the speed of harm, it also accelerates. That means if we're able to automate certain actions, we might need to speed up the ability for people to redress the wrongs. So maybe at that point we need some sort of ADR, some Oracle trigger for an automatic dispute resolution. You know, maybe we need speedier resolution if we have speedier execution. So these are the kinds of deep questions that we need to grapple with from a legal perspective and also from the coding perspective. So also, you know, the code is beautiful. It seems perfect on its face. The legal code is not so perfect and not so clear. And that ambiguity actually plays a role in the law. So for example, there's a body of law called the law of equity. And that means, forget the law in the books. There's a whole body of law that says, if the judge thinks this is not fair, they have some wiggle room to say, you know, even if the law in the books wasn't followed, here in the name of fairness, this is the adjudication, this is the resolution that is actually just. And so this room for ambiguity and room for human context and intervention is very, very important. So how we build a techno-legal framework that takes advantage of the things that we can automate and also takes advantage of the things that humans do well is going to be very, very important. So what COALA Lex is really trying to do is trying to figure out, okay, let's figure out the universe of all of these technologies. How can we create a base administration layer that's automated, that's secure, that's trustless, and then allows for human intervention only at the edge cases? So our core mission is really three. So one is doing the exploration, which is complex and vast, of the systems of law and how technology might play a role. And then to then bridge the gap between what the technology does and what the law does. And what that might mean is creating a hybrid agreement where we do an entire analysis of a particular legal architecture and figure out whether there's a crypto legal structure that can fulfill that function better than the particular rule from the legacy world. And then figure out if we can craft then some interim hybrid ability where folks can voluntarily adhere to a particular crypto legal structure that there's consensus on in lieu of a more traditional rule under a legislation. So how to plug and play and interoperate and scale the integration of these automated clauses into a very old, cumbersome framework. And then the ambition is together build a library of open source modules that people can then plug and play to build their own agreements and coordinate. So this is very early on. I just want to mention one of the projects that's happening within the COALA Lex consortium. Actually, the founder is over there and standing over there in the corner. So Lexon is just one of the projects that are coming out of the COALA Lex initiative, and it's a meta-language where you run a compiler and it produces two outputs. One would be the actual smart contract script, and the other would be the human-readable audit trail of what that particular smart contract does. So what it does is it allows humans then to interact with non-technical folks to start being able to interact meaningfully with smart contracts. And also for us to be able to have an audit trail of what happened inside of that black box. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Bruce. Math has no agency. All this beautiful mathematics of cryptography fail at the endpoints, at users, at where this technological cyberspace world meets the real world. So it's extremely important how we interface with that math and how we wield and design that math. So the advantage of centralized organizations is that you actually kind of know where the power is. There's a hierarchy. There are offices. There are departments responsible for different functions. And then these centralized organizations interact with each other across the globe. Now, blockchains are ushering in a new era of decentralized innovation. I mean, the composition of this room is a testament alone to how many diverse participants and projects there are around the world. So how do we as a community start coordinating and communicating? And so this is why COALA formed, was to try to form the function of being the human coordination layer for this community. So, this is a great quote from Lawrence Lessig. I think it's incredibly important, and I think it goes to what was spoken earlier yesterday about opinionated tech. If going back to the last quote, math has no agency. The tech is neutral, but that tech will be used by humans. So it's incredibly important that we ensure that the values that we're building right now, the projects and POCs and theories that we're putting forth, these do enter the discourse and become the de facto norm. So it's incredibly important, even today, when we don't know where the future is going, to take responsibility for a values-first approach. So I just want to leave you guys with a few thoughts. This is what I see as really important and critical to the space. One is that the regulatory gap is increasing, and we need to close it. And the growing complexity and rate of change is only accelerating. So what's needed right now is a full analysis of this legal infrastructure and where you can actually insert certain smart contracts or crypto legal structures to fulfill those functions, and then how we can then iterate and make sure there are feedback mechanisms so that we're constantly achieving a techno-legal interoperability with the way the technology is advancing. The other is that you guys have the ability, we have the ability to change the legal culture by the products that we build, by the norms that we create in the community. The law on the books, there's I mentioned law of equity, but there's the law on the books and there's the way the law works in practice. There's the way the code works on the books and there's the way the code is wielded in the real world. And there's, you guys have the ability to set a precedent for how the legal culture will respond to the way these products are being built. So again, values-first approach, you have to create better norms. You are creating norms, whether you like it or not. And then, lastly, we also need more translators and storytellers and various domain experts. And this is because this technology is more than payments and coordination and apps and markets. This is really about how human beings are going to interact together in the future. So we all have we're working on our computers, we have our domain expertise, and we need a lot more people from other areas of the world joining this conversation because they have a lot, for example, social scientists, economists, and others. So last word is please invest in your community, invest in coming to these kinds of events, and know that that there is a community out there to support you guys, and that we are going to rise and fall as one. So, thank you.